everyone to get started in their right place. And I think Erin is helping with that. We'll start in about a minute.
Okay, and we are streaming on YouTube. Hopefully everyone has gotten the link in the chat. And Tamara will be taking over as host. I'm going to still try to be in the background, but I'm also going to be in the other meeting. So Tamara can help you out here, but the stream has started to YouTube. So we're going strong there, and I'm going to help with the other one.
Thank you, Erin. We appreciate all of the logistics.
Yes, and Tamara, if you could do the recording on this session, that would be great. Thank you.
That sounds great. I will start that now.
All right. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our session entitled First Steps, Screening and Acting Early. I am Dr. Jennifer Hall-Landy from the University of Minnesota. I work at the Institute on Community Integration and the Masonic Institute on the Developing Brain, again, on the U of M campus. I'm a researcher in the field of early intervention and early identification of autism. And I am joined here today by my colleague from Minnesota Department of Health, Faith Kidder, and my colleague and LEND fellow mentee, Andrea Castillo. Again, we are so happy that you're joining us today. Welcome. All right, Tamara, I am ready for the next slide. Thank you. So a few of our learning objectives today. I'm going to do a brief overview of the autism prevalence numbers in Minnesota and in other communities in the United States. I'm going to review the early signs of autism. We're going to talk about screening of autism and developmental delays. And then we're going to share resources such as the First Steps resources, the Learn the Signs Act Early free materials, and many other resources for families. So we have a short time, but we have filled it with many wonderful materials and information. Next slide, please, Tamara. Just a couple trends just to talk about. I'm going to get a little more specific with the numbers in just a bit, but a couple things to know about autism. Currently, autism is the fastest growing developmental disability in the United States. There is currently, and I'm sure you've been listening to this all day and know there is a great need for autism services and supports in Minnesota and also across the country as well. And we all know early identification is important to support child development and their families. Next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot of what numbers in the autism field have looked like. These are numbers from the ADAM network, and not to use acronyms, it stands for the Autism Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. This is the network that provides the numbers that says 1 in 44 children, approximately 1 in 44 children have an autism spectrum disorder. They've been collecting information since the year 2000. And as you can see, based on the communities they have collected information in, we see a steady upward trend each study here. Next slide, please. So here are the most recent numbers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's ADAM network that were released this December. They were a little early. Normally they're in April right about now, but it was a little bit early. The numbers were 1 in 44 children. These were the most recent numbers released in 2021. And they look at 8-year-olds. When I do the larger presentation of this is 8-year-olds that were identified with autism in the ADAM network. That comes out to an approximate average of about 2.3%. So when we look at these numbers, we say autism really is no longer a low incidence disability. It means if you think of an average 3rd grade classroom, there's typically at least one child with autism in that classroom. And again, it connects to all of the messages today that with numbers that high, we really need services, supports, and early intervention resources to support children and families. Next slide, please. So that's nationally. This is the number in select Minnesota communities. And in Minnesota, looks even a little higher than that national number. We say 1 in 36 8-year-old children were identified with autism within the Minnesota ADAM network. Again, that comes out to almost 3%, 2.8%. So it's even slightly higher in Minnesota. Next slide. So I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit here with this audience. What we know about autism is that early identification is critical. We know from the research literature that children can be reliably identified with autism from about 18 to 24 months. That's with clinicians with specialized training. We also know, intervention at any age for a child is a gift, but we know from the research that intensive early intervention before age 3.5 has the greatest impact on child development and outcomes. It has significant impacts in the areas of cognition and language and has a greater sort of cascade effect on overall child development. So we want to get to kids early. We want them screened and identified as early as possible. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, intervention at any age is highly beneficial developmentally. We know it's more effective and less and more costly. Sorry, that's an error in the slide. When it's less costly when provided earlier in life, and the cost of lifelong supports may be cut by as much as 2/3 with early diagnosis and intervention. That's a really powerful number when we're talking to policymakers. We say if we find a good match between early intervention services and supports in a child, we can significantly cut the cost of lifelong supports. Very compelling. It also, more importantly, improves the life of a child and their family. Next slide. So again, if you think back to my previous slide, we know we can reliably identify children with autism between 18 and 24 months. You might say, what does the ADAM network say? When are we getting to kids? Well, what we see in the national ADAM data, about 50 months, and that translates to 4 years, 2 months. That's much later than our goal, much later than that 3.5, age 3 years. We know we need to get to kids earlier. Now, you may be saying, well, what does it look like in Minnesota? Are we getting to kids younger than we are nationally? Next slide, please. Within Minnesota, unfortunately, our median age of diagnosis was 5 years, 3 months. So we were even later. What that's looking like is we're getting to children with a clinical diagnosis right around the start of kindergarten on average. And while that's good that we're identifying kids, it tells us that critical period, that critical developmental period between birth and 5, we have missed that window with intensive early intervention and supports for children and families. So we really want to move the needle on that. One piece of good news within this number, we know we need to get to kids earlier. We also know in Minnesota with our rates, we are identifying more kids younger. We want to be younger than this, but we're also identifying more children at all ages. So that goes into our average. And so we're doing a good job sort of across the age spectrum of identifying, but we need to get to kids much younger. And I see a question, why is the time so late in Minnesota? It's a good question. I know we're doing a lot of good work. I mean, this group that is hosting this today, the work of the Minnesota Autism Interagency Committee is talking and saying, how do we move the needle on that? How do we get to kids with services and supports earlier? We're looking closely at the number, building up resources. We know we're identifying a lot of kids with developmental delay. We do a really good job with that in Minnesota, but we really need to continue to work on getting to kids even younger. It's also connected to that, similar to what I said, that we're identifying kids at every age more, so that goes into the average. So we're doing a pretty good job of identifying kids at 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. That all goes into that number. So we'll keep working on that. But yes, it's definitely an area that we need to continue to focus on and continue to get kids monitored and screened and identified even earlier. And I'm going to talk a little bit about resources at the end to help with that. Next slide. And then I'm looking at the questions. When you say clinical diagnosis, does that count children receiving early intervention through a local school? That clinical is within clinics and community health centers. And so when we look at our numbers within education, those aren't included in that number. They are included in the overall ADAM, but that specific age of diagnosis is within the clinical world. And we know that can connect kids to waiver-based services, supports, clinically based services. I'm happy to answer more in a bit. I'll keep moving on this, and I'll keep sort of watching the chat as best I can. A couple of reasons related to those questions you're asking. Why are we getting to kids so late? If a psychologist with training like myself can identify kids early, why are we seeing numbers like 4.2 within the National ADAM Network, 5 years, 3 months within the Minnesota? Well, here's a couple things. The research does affirm that autism is hard to diagnose early. There is not yet a clear biological marker. So we look at behavioral observations and characteristics. That is how it is diagnosed. We know that signs come early, but they're often very subtle, and it unfolds over the first years of life. And as I said before, if a child is delayed in language and we're not in communication and we're not giving them an intervention, then it has a cascade effect on development. Then we start to see that impacting other areas like their social. And so we really want to get in early with kids. What the research tells us is that autism really, even in brain imaging studies, it's hard to detect prior to 6 months, but at 12 months, trained researchers, trained clinicians can see some of those really subtle behavioral markers. Next slide, please. Some of the early signs of autism that we look for, when we're testing toddlers and really young children, here are some of the characteristics that parents and families and childcare providers can look for. One, not responding to their name by 12 months of age. That's actually integrated into many of our assessments, saying the child's name and seeing if they turn to their name. Pointing, we want to see a child pointing. If they're not pointing or showing interest by 14 months, that can be an early sign. I want to say we do view this as a combination of signs. One sign alone does not indicate a child has autism, but when you take many together, that's when we start to have concerns. No pretend play by 18 months. We want to see a toddler, early preschooler, early preschools, their job is to socialize and play. Avoiding contact or wanting to be alone. Trouble understanding emotions, delayed speech and language. Delayed speech and language alone does not mean a child has autism. That is our biggest referral into Help Me Grow, and can be indicative of a general developmental delay, a communication delay, but it is something we often see as a presenting concern when a child is referred. Upset by small changes in routine, obsessive interests, repetitive behaviors such as flapping hands or spinning in circles, and unusual sensory reactions. Maybe strong, maybe hypo or hyper, low or high threshold for sensory. Again, not one of these is indicative of autism, but we look at these together, and taken together, many of these can be early signs of autism. Next slide. So one of the hats I wear, and it's a resource that I encourage all of you to Google, the CDC has a Program Center for Disease Control and Prevention with loads of free materials and resources. It's focused on catching general developmental delays, but it's the Learn the Signs, Act Early. If you go to that site and then look at free resources, there are loads of tools for developmental monitoring. These are tools to help parents, childcare providers, healthcare professionals understand how to monitor development and act early if there are concerns. Again, I always say it, intervention at any age is a gift, but we want to get to kids earlier, and we want to create resources and scenarios where parents are able to access screening and services, and developmental monitoring is really the first step of that. And there's free children's books, there's a free app, there are lots of materials to help support families monitoring early development. Next slide. And again, what we talk a lot about, and Andrea, who's going to go after me, is going to talk about some of the work she's done in helping to educate around developmental milestones. But when we say developmental milestones that we're monitoring prior to screening, those are those things we all look for as parents. When a child takes their first step, says their first word. In my world, it's things like pointing, responding to name, but really it's skills such as taking a first step, smiling for the first time, waving by. Those are all developmental milestones. And we really say more generally, they're the way children reach these milestones and how they play, learn, speak, act, and move. So we're going to be talking about that today. We're also going to be talking about developmental screening. Next slide. So this is the app, free app, no advertisements on it. You can download it on your phone. We have it in English and Spanish. And you can help monitor your child's development or development of a child you're working with. And it gives developmental milestones. It gives developmental tips. It gives activities. It shows what developmental milestones look like, and it gives prompting questions before any visit with a healthcare provider to make sure a child's development is on track. Families love it. I encourage everyone to take a look at it and download it, and it can help you monitor development and act early if you have concerns. Next slide, please. These are some of our free children's books. Again, if you Google Learn the Signs, Act Early, you can get these free children's books. You also can contact me if you're looking to get them. It's all about tracking a child's development and tells beautiful stories, color picture, wonderful books about what a child at age 1, 2, and 3 should be doing, again, in English and Spanish, and Andrea is going to share a little more about those. Next slide. I would encourage many of you too, there's a wonderful set of videos that were done in collaboration with the Institute of Community Integration, where I work at the University of Minnesota, and Department of Human Services. They tell family stories around their early identification journey around autism. It's a wonderful resource. It is in 5 languages, and it tells family stories around early autism identification in a variety of communities. Our Somali American community, we have in Spanish, we have families from our African American community, families from our American Indian community, Native American, telling their story of early identification and how they accessed early intervention services and supports. I strongly encourage you to take a look. These are wonderful videos filled with lots of resources. Next slide. This is the First Steps, Pathways to Learning, Playing, and Growing. It provides a summary of key developmental milestones that babies and toddlers should be achieving. It's just another resource. You can find it in the Autism portal. It really helps break down for families in a really simplified way what really the first steps are, what developmental milestones, and how to get the help you need. You see Help Me Grow, Child and Teen Checkups. How do you access, what should your child be doing, and how do you access those resources and get connected to early screening and early services? Next slide. Help Me Grow, wonderful resource that connects parents if they have concerns to assessment and intervention resources. They also have loads of resources and developmental milestones on their website. Next slide. Autism Navigator is another great resource that's being used and partnered with a lot of school districts in Minnesota. You also can access some of the modules for free. I encourage everyone to take a look. It talks about autism in toddlers, early sign, support for families. Sherry Stornick is on the call if you have any questions about that. Another wonderful resource. Next slide. And this is just a little graphic to sort of show our connection between the state's early intervention, developmental monitoring, screening, diagnostic evaluations. It's all an integrated process, and our goal is to get kids identified early and connected early. And with that, next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrea Castillo, to share a bit about her work in the field around monitoring developmental milestones and acting early if there's concerns. Thanks, Andrea.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jen. My name is Andrea Castillo. If you can go on the next slide, please. The community outreach. Yes, I am a community worker, whole family systems specialist, working with families and caregivers in the Latino community in the Twin Cities. And I'm also a Minnesota LEN Fellow, which stands for the Leadership in Education in Neurodevelopmental Related Disabilities at the U of M. And my project, I want to share a little bit about my experience working with parents and using the Learn the Signs Act Early materials, and then my observations from working also with families about early identification and then the monitoring development. Like I said, this was part of my project for my LEN fellowship. What Learn the Signs and Act Early is more like a public health campaign to normalize conversations in the communities about child development, provide tools, more parent-friendly research tools to parents to empower them to advocate for the needs of their kids, and provide more information on why acting early is important. I implemented these materials in my own work as the parent connector in my community, hosting community conversations about development, kind of breaking the stigma of delays, the acceptance of neurodiversity. And what I appreciate about the campaign is that it focuses on strengthening parents' abilities and with tools to advocate for their kids' needs from early on. And connecting them to the early intervention resources through Help Me Grow. Next slide, please. About the Act Early campaign, like Jennifer said, the CDC website has lots of resources. I really appreciate that there's more than 3 languages available. So I was able to get all of the information in Spanish through flyers, developmental questionnaires, books, videos, not just for parents, but also for childcare workers, professionals. But I used more for the parents. And one of the campaign goals is to increase awareness of developmental milestone screening. Know that developmental milestones exist, monitor the child's development. So how to support parents in monitoring that more easily and accessible. Recognize some early warning signs of delay. So a lot of the materials includes what to observe and what to do to reflect the importance of acting early, knowing the importance of acting early as well, and initiating a discussion with providers. So there were some materials that give some prompts to the parents can use to their medical providers or professionals. And then how to initiate discussions as well with providers about development and kind of what to expect in those checkups that the children go through. Next slide, please. In my community, I've noticed that the conversation of development, it's something new, milestones. It's something that I had to work a lot on, helping parents understand the importance of like those checklists and why do we check on milestones. I did a lot of tabling events where parents were at. So like a food shelf, I would like stand there, and while they were getting food, they will get some information, and I often get questions from parents about, oh, I'm on the wait list of this. Do you know anything? Or questions like that will help, that I actually appreciate in helping them connect to the right locations and places. I also, a lot of the books that Jen was talking about are a really great way to have parents implement these messages or get these messages of acting early, because some of the books have those developmental milestones and then the Help Me Grow contact in the back of the book, and kind of reassuring the parent of monitoring these milestones. Next page, please. Also, I was working, or I've been doing parent groups, and so I incorporated a lot of the materials and presentations into the programming, or our programming of early childhood, and had more discussions, more parents interested in what disability is or early intervention is about. Actually, many parents raised concerns about language development or were in that process as well. So I noticed many parents interested in this topic, but not having enough resources or actually meet professionals that can explain them this information. So as a parent connector, I felt that it was less threatening to provide this information to them and actually see some acceptance of kind of navigating some systems or raising concerns as well. Next page, please. Yes, some of the curriculum of acting early I implemented in some of the conversations or PowerPoints or presentations I've done in my community to professionals and to other parent groups as well, at least 40 parents, and then implemented it into my organization in different programs that we have for families, like in-home parenting or parent groups as well. And next page, please. So my observations from working with Latino parents here in my community is that I really I really use the materials to empower them to reassure that their voice matters, and that a lot of times, I think in our culture, we might think that professionals have the ultimatum in decisions of our kids, or might know best. So reassuring that usually their concerns are usually correct, and that actually going with that and having some tools to provide to using the tools as a way to really advocate for their kids' needs, was my goal. And I think is the campaign's goal as well, to normalize conversations of development. So I introduced these tools as a language for them to use in really advocating for their child's needs. Also, I think the prompts were really helpful. Most parents get stuck about, what do I do if a provider does not want to go through listening to my concerns, or things that should wait longer because they're bilingual. So just having these conversations and knowing that they can ask for another doctor to see, or ask actually be more prepared. So like the application or the app of that we are promoting has some things to check before an appointment comes. So then really parents are more in tune with their kids' development, and are keeping track whether they're concerned or not is still helpful. And that they know that they can use these questionnaires and know what to expect to really advocate for their needs was really something that parents used. Also having kind of like a clear view of what the medical system and early childhood system looks like, and how can they obtain services, was really important for parents, especially at this age, to feel more confident about going through this process, and knowing that their kids can be supported no matter their immigration status or language or barriers, that there are supports available for them to also have a translator, and to know that going through the public education system is something that is affordable and free too. Also, parents learn a lot about, early childhood. And I think that was my point of entrance, talking about early interventions, kind of being more, no matter if you have concerns or not, knowing that this is common in early childhood, noticing, being more in tune with their development, and noticing that if there is anything that feels different, or that is not working well in their routines or in their lives, that there are supports out there to kind of meet the needs of their kids. That is all. In conclusion, monitoring development was something really important for me to introduce in my community, and I feel really passionate about the importance of early identification. I feel like there's a huge need, and it helps a lot that we're taking barriers out by having campaigns like this and materials available like this to implement and keep implementing in more communities. Thank you. And so with that, I want to also introduce Faith to the next part of the presentation.
Hi, thank you. My name is Faith. Thank you, Andrea and Jen. My name is Faith Kidder, and I am a child health consultant with the Minnesota Department of Health Child and Teen Checkups program. And I am going to talk about developmental screening. You can go to the next slide. So the first concept that I want to talk about is what is screening? So Jen and Andrea did a great job about talking about milestone tracking and monitoring. And all of this actually falls under not the category of screening, but of surveillance. So it's basically really trying to identify concerns and bring them to a provider. And screening is done in a lot of different situations, and I'll talk about that. But the concept of screening is a specific procedure using a standardized tool. And the other concept about screening, at least the first step of screening, and there's with autism, there can be several levels of screening that's performed. But that first level of screening is really done in a whole population, and it's done with the intention of identifying children who do not have noticeable problems. And so this is really, really key when both Jen and Andrea were talking about how important intervention is as early as possible. And the ideal time to do intervention is before a concern is obvious and the child really has behaviors that are identifiable right at that first glance. It is not a diagnosis. So screening is really just identifying concerns. And if we identify kids early before a concern is obvious, then there are way better outcomes for children and families. Next slide. So I just want to talk a real quick snapshot of my program, which is a Medicaid program. And Child and Teen Checkups is the Minnesota version of the federal program, Early Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment. And the acronym is EPSDT. And it's a Medicaid program to ensure that all Medicaid eligible children receive age-appropriate, comprehensive, preventive well child health screenings, which can include developmental, social, emotional, autism, mental health, hearing, vision, immunizations, oral health, and the application of fluoride varnish. And our program is actually two-part. The Department of Human Services administers the Medicaid dollars that are associated with this program to clinics and those who provide screenings. And then MDH provides trainings and technical assistance to both the Department of Human Services and providers, clinic staff, and anybody else who provides screenings that fit into screenings that are provided by Child and Teen Checkups. As far as support for families, counties, some tribes, and health systems provide outreach and support to families of children who are Medicaid eligible and therefore eligible for Child and Teen Checkups. And they can provide help getting to Child and Teen Checkup appointments, finding transportation, finding an interpreter. And probably the easiest way to locate your local Child and Teen Checkup county coordinator is to do a Google search, or I will also talk about a resource at the end called Help Me Connect. You can go to the next slide. So Child and Teen Checkups, providers and those who provide Child and Teen Checkup screening exams or components should perform developmental, social, emotional surveillance, mental health surveillance at all ages. And then developmental screenings are required at clinic visits or these screening exam visits at specific times. So developmental screenings are recommended at 9, 18, 30 months, and once between 3 and 5 years of age. Social emotional screening, which is often also referred to as infant mental health, are recommended at 6, 12, and 18 months in every year, starting at 2 years of age. And autism screening is recommended at 18 and 24 months. And as you can see, if you have the experience of bringing a young child in for a well child visit, whether they're Medicaid or not, in Minnesota, most of the clinics do follow the schedule just because it's easier to follow the child and teen checkup schedule. But that 18-month visit has a lot of screenings, and not all providers will do all of these screenings at that visit. But it is important that all of these screenings are performed within those early months and years. Go ahead to the next slide. So other programs that also provide early screening is Head Start and Early Head Start, and they are actually required by Minnesota law to follow the screening schedule for child and teen checkups. A follow-along program is often administered through the local, the county local public health, and it's provided by sending these screenings to the parents for the parents to fill out. And it is available by going to the MDH website for the follow-along program. They also have a link on that website for contacts in each one of your local county public health departments. And then early childhood screening is provided by local school districts. And this is actually the one screening that's mandated by Minnesota state law, and it's required to be offered to all children once between 3 and 5 years of age before they go into kindergarten. And it includes developmental and social emotional screening. And so certainly promoting this particular screening is important as well. So go ahead to the next slide. So now I've talked about screening in general. So I want to talk real specifically about the standardized screening. And the first step is identifying a standardized tool that is valid enough it will actually identify concerns. And the Minnesota Interagency, State Agency Developmental Screening Task Force meets on a monthly basis, and we look at all of the recommended developmental screening tools by different organizations, national organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics, Family Practice, et cetera, and then in educational programs. And we look at those tools to determine whether they meet specific validity criteria that will ensure that most of the children that are screened with this tool, when they have a positive concern, will be identified. And children who are developing normally where there aren't concerns won't be misidentified as having concerns. And do be aware, the other concept about screening, when I talked about the ages, the important thing to remember is children need to be screened periodically. That's part of our program. Early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment, because if a child is screened just at 12 months or 6 months or 18 months, they may not necessarily be identified as having a concern if the behaviors that are going to really show that there is a concern present aren't even developmentally milestone that they would be meeting at that age. So periodic screening is very important. I just had to backtrack on that. But so we want screening tools that are valid for all ages, and they really meet that criteria. And if you go to this link that I have, Developmental and Social Emotional Screening for Young Children, there is a list of tools that are valid for all sorts of programs, educational, clinic, et cetera, on this the Minnesota Interagency Developmental Screening Task Force. You can go to the next page, please. So, as I said, at the actual list is all instruments at a glance, and that's on the Minnesota Developmental Screening Task Force webpage. For child and teen checkups, we recommend these specific tools. Now, the ASQ and the PEDS are standardized tools that meet that validity criteria that I was talking about. The SWIC did get approved by the Department of Human Services Child and Teen Checkups Medicaid program as a tool that can be used in clinics because it's a little easier for providers to use, and it's available in about 10 different languages, but it does not meet the validity criteria that I talked about. So one of the things to think about is if you know children are being screened in their clinic with the SWIC, if there's a positive concern identified, they should be rescreened using a recommended screener such as the ASQ3. For social emotional screening, the two screening tools that Child and Teen Checkups recommends in general is the ASQ-SE2 and the Pediatric Symptom Checklist. And the Pediatric Symptom Checklist is only for kids 4 through 16 years of age. The ASQ-SE is up through 5 years of age, similar to the ASQ3. And then for autism-specific screening, the Developmental Screening Task Force does not recommend autism screeners, but for child and teen checkups, we recommend the MCHAT-R. And a couple of things about the MCHAT-R. 50% of the children who are identified as having a positive concern with the MCHAT-R actually have non-autism conditions and concerns. So once again, screeners are not diagnostic. So just because a child is positive for an MCHAT-R positively identified as needing to be referred does not mean that that is necessarily autism. There's a couple other things I just want to throw in about the whole idea about parental concern. I think this is a message I always bring to providers, but do be aware that anytime a parent has a concern, some research has shown that 50%, 80% of the time they're right. Now, if you ask a parent, do you have a concern about a certain developmental behavior, et cetera, particularly, do you think your child can hear, for example? If it's a general question, only 50% of the time are they able to identify there's a concern when there might be a concern present. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say about the MCHAT-R is that if the child does have a positive concern identified on the MCHAT-R, then providers who are administering this tool, they should be doing a follow-up screen in 2 weeks if they're not referring. And if you go to my next slide, I think I cover this. So screening tools, particularly the ASQ-SE, the ASQ3, and the MCHAT-R, actually, and I think some of these are really good tools because they actually break out the scores into 3 different areas. So the first area is children who score within the expected range for their age. So these are the children that are considered to pass, and they should be receiving anticipatory guidance, learning activity, and then the scheduled or recommended developmental screening and social emotional screening, because as I emphasized before, children who may not exhibit a concern at one age, but if they don't get screened again, a concern could develop and they won't get identified. So even kids who pass should be getting screened on those regular ages. Borderline is in the monitoring zone where these kids score lower than what we would expect for their age, but higher than one that would indicate a serious concern. And this is really an area where providers and caregivers and parents should be having a good discussion, because there's some children who probably are more scoring towards the low end of the monitoring zone and would benefit from a referral. Or if there's a parental concern that something's going on, those kids should be referred and the parent should advocate for that. But then we also have children who may be scoring low for their situation. And particularly as we're coming out of COVID and we think about all these families that have experienced many different losses of jobs and family members and caregivers and et cetera, these children may be scoring in borderline, not because there's a delay, but because of all the situational effects that are going on in their lives. And then the refer is certainly the area where we want to make sure that those children are receiving referral and resources, because remember, screening is not a diagnosis, and these kids really need to be referred then, not wait and see. If they're in that beyond the cutoff, they should be referred, and follow-up should occur. And even with the kids who are in those monitoring zones, it's really important to loop back with families and make sure that things are going well. And I think I have one more slide. Go ahead. So some resources, as I mentioned before, all counties have a coordinator that can help families. And now we have some health plans who will also, and clinic systems who will also be doing outreach to families. So any Medicaid eligible family that's enrolled in a health plan, the number on the back of their card should be able to be called, and they should get interpreters and transportation through their health plan. And then Tamara, I think if you could just click on Help Me Connect and pull it up for 1 second. I just want to show people, this is a resource that's available for families and parents with children 0 to 8 years of age. It has been in the process of being developed for about 5 years, and it rolled out last July, and it's part of the preschool development grant. And if you can scroll down a little bit, people can see. So there's 11 different categories of resources. Go up a little bit and I'll just talk real briefly about it. So there is developmental screening resources, and all of these are local to your area. So you can type in your address or your county or your zip code, and it will pull up very local. And how close do you want it? Just like Google Maps, within a mile or 3 miles or whatever. So all of these resources are a curated list that people have been developing as this app has been up. And so go ahead, scroll down. So there's resources specific to American Indian families. There's well-being, mental health, caregiving support, pretty much anything that families need, and you can go down to the end. So the nice thing about this, it's available on your phone, it's an app, and if you're kind of lost about where to begin and you really have concerns for child, it will even give you a connection to child and teen checkups. You can close out this link. And then I think, and then the only other resource that I really want to highlight is Bridge to Benefits. And this is really a list of public programs that families may be eligible for. And I think they actually provide links to the application forms on this website. So this is also a helpful resource. And that is all I have. So you can go ahead to the thank you slide. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Andrea.
Beautiful spring flowers. Since spring is coming, spring is coming.
And then some questions in the chat. So I think if we want to just answer questions, we still have like 6 minutes.
Or a minute maybe. Tamara, do we have a minute or so? Faith, you timed it beautifully. Nice job. And thank you to everyone for your questions. I have been, and Andrea and a couple others have been trying to answer them in the Q&A. I'll take another look I haven't been able to monitor both that and the chat, but there's been some really good questions and discussions in the Q&A. Basically, our message is, please continue to monitor development. There are a wealth of resources out there, be it Learn the Signs Act Early, First Steps, Autism Navigator. There are many, many resources. So developmental monitoring is the first step. Developmental screening and surveillance are an important part of that equation as well. But we don't want to wait and see. We want to watch, learn, understand, and talk to your healthcare provider or childcare provider if you have concerns. We want to get kids in as early as possible. Links are in the chat to the Learn the Signs Act Early materials, the Milestone Tracker app. I'll try and get the first steps in there as well. Sherry, feel free to put the Autism Navigator, any links to that as well. But I think tomorrow we're out of time, correct?
That's correct, Jen. This is tomorrow. We are done at 1:50 to have enough time for a 10-minute break, and then the next presenters to prepare for their presentation. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Welcome. Okay, so next we have Abby, Kim, and Tammy. I will spotlight you. Looks like the ASD and transition slides are presented. And I'll let you go ahead and begin the session when you're ready. It looks like about 2 minutes out. So.
Great, well, we can go ahead and get started in about 2 minutes. I can see the screen here, Kim, it looks great. So I'm assuming that you're going to be forwarding the slides for us. So we'll just give people about 1 more minute to get into the room, and then we'll get started here talking about transition and ASD.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you, Kim. This is Tammy.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can hear you just fine, Kim.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, we will get started here right at 2 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us.
Well, welcome to the Transition and ASD session. I'm glad to be here today, joined by my colleagues Kim Hicks from the Department of Human Services and Abby Wells-Herzog from Vocational Rehabilitation and DEED. And my name is Tammy Childs, and I work with the Metro ECSU, which is a grant through the Minnesota Department of Education. We're very excited today to be able to present a panel on transition. We just have a few things to talk about before we get the panel underway. So I want to just get started right away. If we can go to the first slide. Obviously in this session, we're going to be talking about transition, and we're going to be hearing from people with their experiences within the transition process. Now, as we all know, the transition from school to the real world is challenging for most youth, but especially for individuals with autism. And I think we really heard this morning from several autistic adults that this is an area that is so important, yet under-supported. We definitely learn the most from individuals' lived experiences. But we can also say here on a larger scale that the data is very troubling. So you can see that 2/3 of individuals with autism don't have a job or a plan during their first 2 years of high school. And then they move on to having significant difficulty with post-secondary education and employment. So we've heard feedback from today's participants. I have over the lunchtime that they really enjoy hearing the panel. So we plan to be very brief to highlight a few important services for transition. So you can see here, these are general guidelines for transition services. They're not set in stone, except for a few of the areas like medical insurance. So just to give you a sense of what that looks like, and you can visit that, and you can visit the portal for that or reach out if you have more questions on that. I'd like to move to the next slide. And this is the area that I work in, education. Working with educators, this is what we're required to do to formally start the transition process. And as we all know, it's important to start the transition process much before then. And Abby is going to talk a little bit about the importance of this in a few minutes. But in looking at this slide, it is required in education to do a transition evaluation for all students who qualify for an IEP or special education services in grade 9. And now this is a specific transition evaluation process where we really need to look at what the student needs to be able to be successful. Two of the things that I really want to highlight on this slide is I really see the need for educators to do better to include other service providers, and that is part of my job, to work with educators to do that. So I appreciate everything we've learned today to be able to help with that. And then most important is to make the evaluation and services more person-centered. I've had some opportunity to be involved in some of the evaluations when person-centered practices are used, and we're asking and listening to what they want for their lives, the students want for their lives. Abby, as the next session, is going to be talking about charting the life course, which is a person-centered practice, and I highly encourage you to be involved in that. Just a little bit more on the last slide. I can't see it very big. Oh, the areas of transition. Yes. So these are in line with what we've been hearing today. And I wanted to particularly highlight the bottom statement here when talking about students visiting, when you're visiting college, definitely to visit the Disability Services Department and to make sure that you have a 504 plan that would help bring that support to any student that would be going on to college or post-secondary. I don't know if you wanted to make any more comments about that, Kim, or if we just want to go straight to Abby. Okay.
Hi, this is Abby, and I'm here to talk about how it's never too early to plan for a transition to adulthood and employment. One of the things, as you know, in the educational system, starts transition at 14, but parents and family members and kiddos on the autism spectrum, we need to start the transition prep much earlier. And one of the good ways to start that is through chores. And I know people are like, oh my gosh, chores, but it is possible. I'm a parent of 2 young ladies who are in their 20s now, and they started with chores when they were little kids. And, you know, a 3-year-old can put away toys, a 5-year-old can set the table, an 8-year-old can feed the family pets. And, you know, we always made chores fun, and we tied it to a preferred activity that, after the chores were done, they could do a preferred activity. So, and also I will say chores really help build confidence and skills. And so starting out with our kids young is really important. Some other things that we hear that are really important from adults who, and advocates are that, kids need to be able to ask for help. And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I've heard. They need to tell people what they need, whether it be at school or at work or wherever. They need to know it's okay to do that in whatever communication they prefer. And then they need to be able to say no. And they need to understand when it's okay to say no and who you can tell no and how you can say it. Another thing that's important when we're looking at starting transition planning early is really focusing on our kiddos' unique interests, abilities, and strengths. We want to keep in mind the areas in which they struggle a little bit, but we want to focus on more positive areas. And then looking into assistive technology or augmentative communication devices early and having them comfortable to use those things can really be beneficial to make transition to adulthood easier. Employment, research tells us that teens who work in high school are much more likely to be employed as adults. And, how can you help your teen find a job? You can talk to your friends or businesses you frequent. I think often we do that with our typical kids, our neurotypical kids, but we don't always do that with our teens on the autism spectrum. Sometimes our kids are going to need extra support and extra time to learn, and that's okay. They get extra time is okay. And supports may be available through schools or county or state services. You might want to talk to your student's IEP case manager, or if they're hooked up with Voc Rehab, talk to their Voc Rehab counselor. Many of you heard this morning Alyssa Klein from Voc Rehab talking about employment services. Every school in Minnesota has 2 VR employment service as people assigned to the schools. So make sure your students connect with them. And teens and adults who are out of school can still apply for Voc Rehab. We're just kind of focusing here on the transition.
Thank you so much, Abby. And I love that you mentioned, just like Alyssa shared this morning, just because maybe you didn't get diagnosed until after your transition age years doesn't mean you can't still access those services. That is such a wonderful reminder for all of us. And we talked a little bit about this morning, but just because it's relevant to the conversation, as a reminder that Min Choices assessment identifies the different things that people are eligible for and can help unlock those supports and services that may be available to help support transition. As we shared this morning, again, that Disability Hub website is so helpful to help do some of that. You've all seen little hints and tips of the Pathway series throughout the day today. The Pathway series was really developed as an interagency working group. The individuals on this call and others that you've heard from today went through the Pathway documents with a fine-tooth comb. To say that we overthought every line is probably an understatement of epic proportion. But we are so proud of the series of Pathway documents because they really do help support people throughout their journey. And because they are from the interagency group and they have the Minnesota logo on them, you know you're getting accurate information at each stage of that journey. And for those of you that support families, they've already been translated and they're ready to go in Hmong, Somali, Karen, Oromo, Russian, Vietnamese, Spanish, and as well. So you can take a look at those, download them, save them, or request copies, and we'd be happy to send them to you as well through that Autism Resource Portal. So again, thank you so much for coming to this presentation and for these resources. And I'm going to quickly get to the most important, best part, which is our panelist. So I would ask our panelists, if you're comfortable, to take yourselves show your cameras so we can see you as we talk. I'll do brief introductions and then we'll open it up for questions. So Jacob, will you give us a wave? Jacob is currently in a transition program. Next year, he will be participating in a project search opportunity. So that is very exciting. So welcome, Jacob. Robin is a special education supervisor in for transition services and work experience with Bloomington Public Schools. Jennifer is an adult with autism and runs her own graphic design business and also has a background in early childhood education and special needs. And Quillen, I know he's here, but I don't see his picture, but that might just be because I can't see everybody.
Yep, I'm here.
Awesome. Is a vocational rehabilitation counselor serving students in the Bloomington Public Schools. So we will just dive into our questions. If you all want to share a little bit about yourself as we get into the questions, that would be great. I'm going to skip over kind of the broader introductions just simply because I want to get to the meat and bones of our discussion today. So I will call on you to kind of kick us off, and then hopefully the dialogue will just allow us to ebb and flow a little bit more naturally. That's been working really well for us today. So I'm going to start, if that's okay with you, Jacob, if you don't mind kicking us off and sharing a little bit about you're currently in this transition journey. You're in the thick of it in a transition program, going to finish out your experience with Project Search and just wrapped up high school. So can you talk to us a little bit about who was involved in your planning and how did they help make sure that it was about you and felt that it was your journey?
So excuse me, I have my headphones in because there's a storm going on outside. So one thing I remember that in terms of people who helped me plan my transition program were my parents, my case manager from high school, I think, yeah, I think maybe vocational rehabilitation opportunity services, and the county also did also got me into this transition program to make sure that I was aiming toward my needs and such.
Awesome. Thank you
And
so much, Jacob. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no. You can continue. Is that the first one so far? Or?
Well, I was going to ask you, you're in the middle of this, and I promise not to tell your current team, maybe, but is there one thing that you think could have gone better as you were making this plan, or one thing that you wish you would have thought about or known?
I wish the program wasn't so segregated. It's like you have one person, like you have one disability you have one place serving disabilities on one side, and then you have another place serving people with disabilities on the other. And I remember that during elementary school it wasn't so segregated, and we would just all come together and just be friends with one another. And it's like I wish it was the same case for transition programs.
Thank you, Jacob. I really appreciate it.
And one more thing, I wish the material they had should have been based on my needs, because I feel like it sort of applies to everyone, not just a certain person. And I think they should do a better job of giving information, teaching independence through their IEPs, and not just grouping a certain IEP together and having everybody learn the same material that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So given what Jacob just shared, I think I'm going to look to Robin as the director of a transition program to talk a little bit about these questions about what does that look like for planning, and how are those person-centered practices supposed to be incorporated into the plan, knowing full well that everybody's plan looks a little bit different and sometimes things don't go in the way that we envision, but maybe you can share a little bit about what it should look like.
Yes, well, thank you, Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing about your experience, and also what you wish would have happened when you were in transition. And I could not agree with you more. I wish that our transition programs were for all students. We find that all students really could benefit from what we do in transition. I've spent my entire teaching career, or with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 years, working with high school and transition age students. And when I moved into the supervisor role, one of the pieces that I found really important to bring with me to Bloomington is really allowing the student to have voice and choice in their programming and what high school and transition looks like for them. And so here in Bloomington, I would say all of our programming does revolve around what we like to call our good life, and then what we'd like to avoid. And that's really that person-centered planning that we talked about earlier, where a student gets to dictate, hey, this is what I want for my life. This is what an awesome life would look like for me. And these are some of the pieces I'd like to avoid. And we go through a process of doing individual interviewing of all of our students. In Bloomington, we do have a little bit smaller of a transition program. I believe this year we have around 30 to 35 students. Next year, we're topping closer to 50. And so it does take a little bit of time to work through that process with our newer students. However, it's such a valuable piece to get their input and their say in what do they need while they're in transition to bridge that gap into the what's next, right? What happens after I'm done with that formal education and moving into those adult services? And Quillen, I'm super excited to see that you're here with me, because Quillen is our partner in Voc Rehab. And so Quillen participates in a lot of those meetings with our students and is able to look at the work that we've done at the Transition Center and hopefully use that then to guide the work that he does with students in counseling them into those job placements. And so we also then use those person-centered planning documents or those good life documents to really talk about, are the decisions that you're making right now moving you towards that good life or that what you want? Or is it moving towards what you want to avoid? And it really becomes a great conversation where we move away from the consequences of what often happens in our high schools or our formal K-12 system into this choice that you're making. Where is it landing on your person-centered plan? And if it's not, how do we talk about maybe shifting that a little bit? Or has your plan changed? Knowing that our person-centered plan changes as we get older or learn new things. And so those are a very fluid document. That kind of help answer the question?
It absolutely does. And if anybody's wondering what Robin is talking about in the trajectory and using those charting the life course, the 3 o'clock session actually features somebody very close to my heart. My Bubba's, my 11-year-old, is going to actually do a charting the life course with a person-centered planning live for you all to watch. We're going to do a live team meeting for you all. So if you're curious to learn more about that process, we will be diving in at 3 o'clock. Quillen, I'm going to go ahead and throw to you since Robin sort of opened you up for what your role is there. And then Jen will come to you after that.
Perfect. So yes, hello everyone. My name is Quillen Garrett. I'm a transition counselor with Vocational Rehabilitation Services, otherwise known as VRS. As Alyssa had stated in her presentation, we fall under the umbrella of the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and our goal is to help individuals obtain competitive integrated employment. So I primarily serve students in the Bloomington School District, but there are VRS counselors in schools all across the state, and my role is to help students and families prepare and plan for employment and provide support throughout the employment process. So, typically I'll meet an individual while they're in school, work with them while they're in school, and continue providing services after they graduate to help them reach that job goal and be supported throughout the whole employment process. And then I guess in regards to person-centered, I think VRS services are person-centered in that we as counselors, we want to help the people that we're serving reach an employment goal that meets their interests, skills, and needs. Because it's really important that a person enjoy and find purpose in what they're doing in order for them to be successful in the job. So we're not just applying to any old job that is hiring. We want to make sure that it's something that the job seeker is on board with. The person served, they guide the services they're receiving. We take a team approach. So if there is a family member that the person wants to be involved in the planning, or if there are some other outside agencies that they want involved, we welcome them to the table. The counselor and the participants will create an employment plan, and that'll outline the job goals and the services and activities that participant chooses to engage in while working with VRS. And they also get to make an informed choice about the other service providers they want to work with when partnering with VRS. So I think throughout their time working with those participants have the ability to make a lot of self-guided decisions about the services that they're receiving.
Thank you so much for that. And now I'm going to throw to Jen. And do you want to share a little bit about how kind of your transition journey, because we had that question in the chat about those that were diagnosed in adulthood. So do you maybe want to kind of help rope us into that a bit?
Sure. So I was diagnosed as an adult, so I had no official transition plan with any sort of autism in mind. Is my video working? Okay. But just instinctively, because I've always been a big journaler and, I know kind of what I need. And so I did actually, as a lot, listening to what you guys are doing, talking about, I did a lot of that person-centered planning without knowing what it was called. Just did a lot of it on my own, like literally a notebook and myself sitting under a tree in a park thinking about life. And so and that has made all the difference. And I've been able to help some other folks with that too, just informally. So I'm thrilled to hear that that's a formal part of the plan here in Minnesota. I grew up in California, so everything I'm saying is coming from California schools, by the way. So I love that that's such an intentional part of what's happening here. I was very blessed, quite frankly, that I had an excellent support system in high school. The high school curriculum that I had happened to feed perfectly into the college that I chose. I got into my first choice of colleges. A lot of things fell into place. The universe really took care of me. So there's a lot that I've been brainstorming in preparation for today that I can share about, like in hindsight, what worked really well, some logistics and some bigger picture things, and some gaping holes that, things that nobody even told me until, especially about sort of the differences between the academic world and the adult social world. I had no idea what to expect in that. And parts of that, I honestly, even just a few months ago, have learned some new things about that. And it makes the whole experience make a lot more sense. So I love that our kids in the state are getting that experience earlier. And I'm very happy to share anything I can here today about what has or hasn't worked. But yeah, a lot of what worked for me was the universe took care of me. It could have gone a lot worse. I'm very blessed.
Well, and thank you so much for your honesty and willingness to share those things, because I think there are lessons to be learned, right? That's why we called this symposium The Power of Storytelling, because we really do believe that. So this time I'm gonna kick off, I think, to Robin. I'm gonna ask you to start us off, because you have the expertise in those transition programs, and then we'll kind of go down the line from there. But as families are looking at how graduation is planned, and they're looking at potentially one of those 18 to 21 transition programs, how does that look different? And what should they be considering? I know I've heard families say to me, I don't understand they're a senior and they're graduating, but they're not. Can you help us understand that a little bit?
Yes, for sure. I would say that's probably one of the more confusing parts of special education is when students hit that senior year. And please know, I'm speaking much to the Bloomington district and how things go, and things may be different in the district you live in. There are many districts in the state of Minnesota that don't have transition plans attached to their district, but it's a part of their continuum of services that they offer. And I know some districts that are actually close to us have transition programs in an intermediate district, or they're serviced with an ed district. And so it's where districts come together and they collaborate to create a bigger building to be more advantageous and provide more opportunities for students. In Bloomington, we do have the awesome opportunity to have our own transition program. And when we're looking at that senior year, we're really looking at, in those three areas of transition, what are the students' needs? What are the functional skills? What are the academic skills related to independent living? So am I able to care for myself? Am I able to advocate for my wants and needs? Cooking, laundry, some of those basic adulting skills that we talk about. Then we look at that post-secondary, right? What training would I need to do post high school, more in that college or a training program or a certificate program? And then also in that area of employment. So how am I supporting those employment skills, those soft skills, that social interaction with other people, executive functioning skills with planning and organizing, and being able to do problem solving. And then also we talk a little bit about transportation too. So when we look at transition services in the senior year, the IEP team is really coming together to look at where are the students' skills at. From that 3-year reevaluation that has happened all the way to that IEP into progress reports. How is the student progressing through their education? And then what additional supports or services are needed? Students can graduate in 3 different ways: via credit, credit based on your IEP, and then IEP goals. So in those 3 areas, we then look at if a student needs additional programming but earned their diploma, we put your diploma on hold. We hold that as a way to say, hey, we want to provide you services up until you're 21 years old because you're entitled to them if you've qualified for special education services. And that can be a really confusing part because, wait, I earned my diploma and now you're going to hold it. And what we really talk to families about is we hold it so that you can still get services from the public schools. Once I've given you your diploma, you no longer are eligible or are able to receive those services through the public school system. And then it becomes opportunities through those county services and county agencies that then would support transition needs. So holding the diploma is not that your child or adult did not earn their diploma. It's just a way for me to say, I'm still going to service you from special education within the district. So it's a little bit confusing. And I just encourage you, if those questions come up or when those questions come up, I just encourage you, ask questions, ask lots of questions. If you're confused, just keep asking questions so that you can get the most accurate information possible. I would say the months leading up to graduation, we look at transition referrals even through your junior year and anticipate our freshmen and sophomore that might need them. But really what we're looking at again is how are you progressing in your skills? It's very individualized for each student. And sometimes students are really on board and they're like, yep, I want help in those areas. And sometimes it takes students to come and tour a transition center, to go and look at the space, be involved in a classroom, observe a classroom that's happening, talk to some students that are in the transition center for them to really start feeling comfortable with, yeah, this is actually really cool. At a Bloomington Transition Center, we really pride ourselves of saying, we are not high school. I'm not an extension of high school. If you're looking for that, this isn't the right place. We really are about bridging the gap to that adulthood. So we kind of call it, we're like the pre-college or the community college of post-high school experience. And we really try to create that environment for students that once they get here, they are like, this is awesome. I love this. And so I guess if anything, I would encourage you to ask questions and tour transition spaces to see if that's the right fit for your young adult.
Thank you for that thorough explanation. I know that that's very confusing for lots of parents and youth. Quillen, I'll throw to you real quick and just ask, because you're usually on those teams in those months leading up to that graduation, whether that be the ceremonial graduation or that receiving the diploma at 21 for students that choose to go through a transition program. How do you think students are feeling, and what do you see your role in supporting them during that very exciting but scary time?
Right. So, I've seen the whole gamut of emotions. Students are excited, they're nervous, they're unsure. Sometimes they're very confident. And I tend to feel the same way. All those emotions kind of, depending on how much planning we've done, for those next steps. But, I think, leading up to graduation, and as Robin had mentioned, it very much is individualized, depending on the student, but we want to make sure, of course, that they are connected with VRS, and also, any additional supports that we think would be beneficial to that person. We want to make sure that they are connected there as well. So again, talking about looking at the waivered services that they could possibly receive. Getting, if there's transportation that we still need to figure out, that will be very important in their ability to get and keep a job. We want to, we get those things figured out. If they plan on going into post-secondary training, we want to make sure we have a timeline set for that. So, okay, you're looking to start in the fall, or when are you looking to start? Do we got to get the financial aid taken care of? Do we have to, hammer down what program of study you are looking to get started with. It again really just kind of depends on the person and what the team wants to do, I guess.
Thank you so much for that. Jacob, I'm going to throw this to you, and then Jem, and then Robin, we've got a question in the chat that I want to make sure we cover before we move on to the next slide. So Jacob, as you were getting ready to go into the transition program, how were you feeling? And then I think maybe for some of us that don't know what Project Search is, would you mind sharing a little bit about what that is and how you're feeling about entering into that in the fall?
So to be completely honest, I was actually excited for me going into the transition program that I'm currently going to at first. And I will admit the program has benefited me some. And going on and adding on to how is graduation planned for, even in terms of transition programs. I think one of the main things you want to do is you want to consult someone who may help you get into the transition program and or someone who knows a little bit about it that you can ask. And in the months leading up to graduation, I felt extremely happy because I would finally be out of school. We all have that feeling. And for those of you who don't know what Project Search is a program where their objective, unlike most transition age programs, is to help prepare people with disabilities for competitive employment. And as for the one here in Rochester, it's basically you working at Mayo Clinic or having an internship there at least, and it will provide you skills that will help you to in the future they'll help you in the future, which you can keep it will keep future instances in mind. And
thank you.
And oh yeah.
No, I was just going to jump to Jennifer, and I do want to say, I know Jacob mentioned he's in the middle of a severe thunderstorm, and so am I. So hopefully we won't lose connection as we go through this little bit of weather. Jen, did you want to share a little bit about how you were feeling up to graduation, and what did it look like for you?
For me, I am very blessed that I came from a family where college is what happens after high school, every bit as much as fourth grade happens after third grade. It just was never a question. That, of course you're going to go get a 4-year degree. And I got into the first choice of colleges, and they offered me a scholarship. And, so I was, in hindsight, I was very excited because I knew academically I felt very confident, and that was accurate. Academically, my high school did prepare me for that very well. I think I was completely oblivious to the social stuff that was coming my way in terms of going away to college. I had no idea how to do any of, navigating new friends and how do you connect with people, and people would just say, oh, go join a club. Okay, checkbox. This is a step I can take. I can join a club. It's not actually that easy. Again, the universe took care of me. In my orientation at college, the freshman week of welcome, I met the person who ended up becoming my best friend. To this day, she's one of my best friends. She's incredible. She was sort of my social guide the whole time. I just would attach to her, and she made me get out of the dorm and go do things with her, and she's an angel. But I think leading up to graduation, I knew that I'd be fine academically, and I had no idea that there was more than that I should have been thinking about. So having again, the rest of the transition plan here, hearing that you're looking at the big picture and more of the soft skills, social skills, executive function, all of that stuff. I was not identified yet as autistic or ADHD. And so I had no idea that other people weren't struggling this hard with all of those executive functioning things. And so I just doubled down on all of my organization strategies and all the things that I knew worked for me, and pretty much burnt myself out trying to keep up with it all. So yeah, there was a lot that I didn't know, and then it hit me later.
I think that is such a wonderful reflection to remind us that what happens after high school isn't just work, or isn't just academic, or isn't just, right? But it's all of the things, and we need a lot of those skills in all of those areas to be successful. So I thank you for bringing that to us.
Okay. I will add one thing to that, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
My family did an awesome job of preparing me in terms of adulting skills. Like, I knew how to balance a checkbook. I knew how to use a screwdriver. Really basic stuff, but I knew how to go to the grocery store and get the ingredients for a basic recipe. Like, those turned out to be the things. I knew how to sew a button on clothes. Like, those turned out to be things that a lot of the other kids in my dorm didn't know. And so that actually ended up being very helpful. There were so many other things I felt clueless about in the world, but I was, again, in hindsight, I can see I was able to go, okay, at least I don't stink at this. There is one thing I know what I'm doing. I'm not completely helpless. And this thing that I can do is actually something other people can't do. So I get to help them and teach, repair their skirt when their button falls off. And in one case, help get my friend out of her dorm when her doorknob fell apart while she was on the inside, and because I knew how to use a screwdriver. And there was one, my dad made sure there was one in my kit when I left. How to write a check for rent. Like, these are basic things. They don't teach you those things in school. And I was very blessed that my family made sure I had those skills. And that was a little thing that I took for granted at the time. But in hindsight, with other things being such a struggle, it was a real blessing that those things were not.
Thank you. That is so wonderful to hear. Robin, I'm going to throw this question to you. And I want to preface with, I'm sure Robin's going to answer about how her district handles it. And I would encourage people to reach out to their districts as well. So Robin, the question in the chat is, can students who are in charter schools get transition services from their home districts?
Yes, absolutely, you can. Any student who's qualified for special education is eligible for services up to age 21, as long as they continue to demonstrate a need. And so I would reach out to your home district to talk with the transition center or where they provide transition services, and you would just register into the district for those services. Most charter schools, I would say, end their services at senior year. Not all, but some.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. There's another question about Project Search. So what I will tell you about Project Search is it is national. And there are other Project Search sites, not only in Minnesota, but nationally, but they are not everywhere. So I would encourage you to take a look at the National Project Search site. I cannot throw it in the chat and present my screen at the same time. I have run out of screen space, but I will try to remember to do that when we wrap up here in just a few minutes. So I will move us to our next question. And I love this question because when we start talking about the future, we're not talking about 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. We really are talking about the future, right? And so this time I think, Quillen, we'll start with you because I don't think I've had you kick one off yet. When you're working on a team, how do teams think about those long-term goals, and what kind of barriers or successes have you seen teams encounter when kind of looking towards that broader future?
Right. So I think for long-term goals, we want to make sure that we, again, have all the key support systems in place if they're necessary. So again, it really depends on the need of the student. If I'm working with a student who has more needs, we'll want to make sure that they've looked into the waiver funding so they can get those long-term employment supports. Because, with VRS services, we provide services up to a certain amount of time. before we begin to fade those services away. So if you have the waiver, the hope would be that waiver could kick in and then provide those long-term supports like ongoing job coaching and those kinds of things. If I'm working with someone who maybe has less needs and they can maybe manage independently or with natural supports at their place of employment, I would probably, close their case as successfully employed if they were stable and happy at their job and it meets their job goals. But we also have what we call extended services for people after VRS closes their case as successfully employed, and maybe they don't have a waiver. You can still get connected with these extended services. These extended services or EE services, they're less intensive, and it's kind of like twice a month check-ins to make sure everything is going well at work. And anyone who gets their file closed with VRS, they can always come back to work with us at any time, as long as they're eligible for services. So I've closed people successfully and began working with them years down the road, because they want to find another job, or maybe they want to go back to school, and a whole host of other reasons. So that's kind of how we work with the long-term goals. And then the other question that you have, barriers that we've encountered trying to achieve goals, I would say just, again, and I'm probably sounding like a broken record here, but just making sure that, so it can be difficult when you don't have all those supports in place. And voc rehab services, we primarily focus on the vocational things, right? So if there's if we do have these, as Alyssa had pointed out, we do collaborate with Centers for Independent Living. So I know out of our office, we work with MCIL, so they can get individuals connected to housing services, or if you need to apply for some kind of healthcare, or you need to apply for waiver services, they can help with some of that non-vocational stuff. So it always helps if you have that stuff ready to go before you graduate, but if you don't, we could assist with that as well.
Perfect, thank you. We do have a question in the chat for you as well. And it says, what happens if someone moves? Can their case reopen where they move, or what is that process? What should they know?
Yeah, so your case can absolutely follow you when you move. So in Minnesota, we had transferred cases. So basically what happens is you need to just initiate that transfer. So if you, again, I work in Bloomington. So if you move out of Bloomington and say you move out in rural Minnesota somewhere, we have on our website, you can enter in your zip code, and then it will show you the closest VRS offices to your address. So you can go, you can call the office yourself and initiate that transfer, or you can have a counselor help you with that as well.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I am going to throw, I think, back to Jacob. I'm sorry to pick on you again, Jacob, but can you talk a little bit about whatever barriers you felt your team maybe encountered trying to make your long-term plan?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I think one of the main barriers that I have experienced in terms of getting into services, I feel like was, well, for employment services and for employment in general, for the job that I want to do, there isn't much transportation to take you to the place that I want to work. And I think transportation, sometimes it takes a big part in making sure that you get to work from wherever you live, or whenever you may go to college, or wherever you live. Another barrier that I've experienced is sometimes you expect something with it. Sometimes services aren't fast and sometimes they can be slow to process paperwork and applications to get you toward a certain goal. I know that's sometimes the case in Rochester.
You know what? I think the fact that you brought up transportation is huge. I think that's a barrier that a lot of teams face. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. Robin, did you have any barriers that are common that you'd like to share with us?
I would say transportation would be the number one that we have for students, both in employment settings and then post-secondary settings. And then I would agree with what Quillen said, just understanding what resources and supports are out there for families. It can be very overwhelming. And so again, I just encourage people to ask questions. And if you need something, don't stop until you've got an answer that you feel like your question has been answered.
And Jen, you sent a message in the chat, but I want to let you highlight it because I think I'm hearing a theme. And when I hear a theme, I want to make sure I hit all areas of it.
Yes, sorry, I meant to put that out to everybody. So just, yes, echoing the transportation, and don't think in a binary way of I have a driver's license or I don't have a driver's license. It's possible to have one and still really struggle to drive, especially if you have to do it every day, if you're doing it in traffic, if it's at the beginning and end of a long work day. That's different than I have a license. Technically, I can give somebody a ride if I have to in an emergency. It's a matter of kind of how you use your spoons. And that was a decision personally that I made a long time ago, was to just start driving less. And when we moved here to Minnesota, I did not actually bring my license with me, and I don't have a car here. And it is the biggest relief. I can't even explain how much stress and anxiety that decision took off. So again, I'm very blessed. For me, that's sustainable because I work from home. That doesn't apply for everybody. But just please realize that just because you want to really push your kid to get their driver's license and they do eventually get it, that's great. It's a nice thing to know that you can do it. That doesn't mean that they can easily, comfortably, sustainably always drive indefinite distances as often as they might want to. It's still an exhausting process sometimes.
I think that is such a wonderful thing to bring up. We heard that this morning from some of our adults about it being later in life that they were able to obtain their driver's license, even though they had tried and worked really hard for that. So I think that's so important. And I think we sometimes forget about how vital transportation is in those long-term goals. So full disclosure, one thing we've learned today is that we overshot across the board in what we thought we would get through. So I want to apologize on behalf of the interagency team for having higher goals than we have been able to achieve as far as questions go. But I am so thrilled with the dialogue we had in this meeting today and the dialogues we've had all day long. They have been just lovely and so informational. Tamara has been kind enough to put the link for the Charting the Life course presentation in the chat, and that is in the other room. And then in this room, if you want to stay here, in this room, we will be doing the telehealth presentation, which is a partnership with our U of M partners. And they also have folks who have actually done the work coming to share about that experience with you all. So I'm so excited that we're just not preaching at you, but we're bringing in people who have done the work to share those experiences. The other room is the Charting the Life course. And as I shared earlier, that will be, I'm going to do less talking, which will be great. And it'll be me and my son as we go through actually creating his best life trajectory together with a person-centered planner. So choose your room, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all so much.
Are you all seeing the slides or presenter view?
It's presenter view.
Thank you. I'll switch that.
I'm seeing just the slides, not the presenter part.
Give everyone a few more minutes to join.
Mary, to access the other session, if you scroll up to where Tamara put the link, that should be the link for the next session. Oh, someone just posted it. Great, thank you. Let us know if you can't access that.
Good afternoon, Adele, Jessica, and Muna. This is Tamara at MDE, supporting the conference today. Let me know if you need anything. I've added a spotlight to your free video so people will be able to follow you. So just let me know if you need anything. Glad you're here.
Thanks. That sounds great. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we can go ahead and kick it off here. We have a pretty jam-packed agenda, and we want to make sure that we have enough time to get through all of the wonderful content that people took a lot of time to set aside and put together. So this breakout session is really focused on telehealth and how telehealth can be used in a way, or we hope it can be used in a way to improve service delivery options, more flexible service delivery for children, youth, and autistic adults in Minnesota. I'm Jessica Simisak. I'm at the University of Minnesota, and I'm joined today with this wonderful group of people, Del Dimian, who's also at the University of Minnesota, and Muna Khalif, who I'll be talking to you today. And then we have 4 great providers who really stepped up and put together some really wonderful examples of implementation that's been successful for them. And so we want to save as much of the time as possible for them to be able to share with you all. All right, next slide. This is our overview. We're going to talk a little bit about some common barriers that may prevent people from accessing services or supports that might be beneficial to them. It's unfortunately not an exhaustive list, so there are more barriers than what we are able to cover here. And this is a very complex issue. So we also aren't unfortunately going to be able to propose, solutions to everything. But we're going to talk about how telehealth is but one way that can be incorporated into future service delivery models to hopefully provide more flexible options for people to meet their needs and address some of the barriers that might exist to accessing support and services. It's also important to discuss, how a health equity lens should be applied to any new innovative kinds of intervention delivery like telehealth, because it really should be a tool to help more people access support and not to perpetuate or create additional barriers to access. And so in addition to some of the content that we've provided, every provider also discussed some barriers that they've maybe experienced or people they've supported or experienced. And then we're going to end with those implementation examples and hopefully a little bit of time for questions, but please feel welcome to send along questions or get in touch with us. We're really excited to talk to you today. All right, next slide. So I'm going to talk through this slide and then I'll hand it over to Adele for a little bit here. But these are some different barriers to services and supports that might affect children and families, adults, youth, and again, it's not an exhaustive list, but to receive a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder, which as we all likely know on the call today, can then make somebody eligible to receive some of these different services or supports. There's usually a really lengthy wait period that occurs. And this is due to a lot of different issues, but a lot of it boils down to shortages in providers, providers being who do evaluations, potentially being in more more metro areas. And so that wait can be anywhere from 6 to 12 or even more months, unfortunately, than that, especially during the pandemic. That has not improved. I should note the pandemic this was an issue prior to the pandemic, but it definitely has not improved the situation. And if anything, it's made it worse. And then there can, be additional challenges for people who might be outside of major metro areas where they'd have to travel long distances to access this type of evaluation. And there's also, additional disparities in access for people from culturally and linguistically diverse groups who might wait longer. These are some bullets that Adele's been helping trickle in here to again, not have an exhaustive list here, but to have some of these different issues that can then occur after someone has received a diagnosis prior to them accessing the services and supports that might be beneficial to them. There's a lot of shortages of providers. We'll dive into that a little deeper in one of the upcoming slides. There might be limited service areas. One of the themes of our talk today is that while telehealth is an important tool, we always have to keep an eye on quality and keep an eye on evaluating the effects of anything that we're doing. And so one challenge for a lot of providers is to have that really high quality support. You need to make sure that you are supervising and training your staff and, doing all of that. And so there might be a service area where, that provider serves to try to make sure that they're doing those really high quality levels. And so that can create areas where there might not be available services. And then once staff are, onboarded, there can be a high turnover, which of course perpetuates the needs for additional training and retraining of new staff. The systems and providers are not adequately set up to meet the needs of all of the people in culturally and linguistically diverse communities. There's racism that is experienced by people when they're interacting with providers or within the healthcare or educational systems. And there's a couple bullet points at the bottom is talking about if somebody has more, significant needs, or they might have complex communication needs, they're not verbally communicating, or they might engage in aggression or self-injurious behavior, things like that. Sometimes there might not be support for that level of needs, and then they might receive more restrictive support than is probably appropriate. And related to that, if somebody does receive, more higher intensity kind of support, there's not a lot of options for kind of that step down support or care. All right, next slide. Del, if you want to take over from here for a little bit.
Sure, and I'm just going to click through so everyone can see our slides all at once. Thank you, Dr. Simasek, for introducing our talk today. And we're just so excited to be here, and we're really excited for our providers to share. So we're gonna, like she said, we're gonna go quickly through some of these slides, that we're more than happy to connect with you all at any point to talk more about these. So this slide is just to kind of reiterate some of the things Dr. Simasek was talking about related to shortages we're seeing, wait times, and disparities overall in terms of service access and provision. Right now, what we see, it's across the board, unfortunately. It's not one type of provider. On the left column here, you see, everyone from developmental and behavioral pediatricians down to occupational therapists, behavior analysts, special educators. And so a phenomenon that we have seen before the pandemic, as Dr. Simasek was saying, during and maybe after, if we're getting through the woods here, hopefully, is that there are very substantial wait times across the board for accessing services, or accessing services in the amount or support needed. So some families or individuals are only getting a proportion of the hours that they qualify for. Due to both provider shortages and or where they live, there might not be provider in their area. So right now we see anywhere from about 9 months to 3 years to accessing just early intensive behavioral intervention and other early intervention types of services. We also see 5 months to, it's actually greater now, to just an evaluation. And then we also are seeing quite a bit of lag in terms of outpatient child and adolescent psychiatry services. And these disparities in terms of access are compounded when you live in areas that are less populated, so in more rural areas. And then obviously for our culturally linguistically diverse autistic children and adults that are receiving services, we do see a trend where they potentially do receive less services overall. And so what we're going to talk about briefly, so we can hand it over to our wonderful providers, is kind of this improving the rapid access to support. So what we mean by that is trying to get everyone's foot through the door, at least initially, through to get access to services. And so what we see in terms of Minnesota is that there's 2 wait times potentially for families or individuals. One wait time is just accessing an evaluation for a medical diagnosis of autism. Right now, typically the diagnosis age is around 4 years, but the wait list for evaluation is at least 12 months. And again, this unfortunately has gotten worse during the pandemic. And we see, again, greater difficulties for families who reside outside the metro area. The map on the left shows a study that we conducted related to the average delay to accessing early intensive and behavioral intervention. And actually what we saw was that we observed that even though there was more service providers in the metro area, in the 7-county metro area, that there was still quite a lag. So both rural families and families living in the metropolitan area were not accessing services necessarily within at least 6 months. And again, we do see that children from culturally linguistically diverse groups tend to often get diagnosed later. And so the reason why we care about this is that we want to be able to better understand how these barriers are affecting people, but how we can potentially provide some solutions. And one way that we're going to talk about today is how we can use telehealth in different models to support flexibility in terms of service access and allocation. This is just a quick example of what some of those early intensive behavioral intervention types of sessions might look like. I'm just going to play through the first minute or so here just to give you a taste of kind of what that might look like.
All right, that looks great, guys. So now we're just going to play for a minute here, and I'll let you know when we'll move on to our next session. Look, it's purple. Wow, that's some good coloring. I like that purple. What's a dinosaur?
So here we see a parent and a child playing together. You see a coach at the top of the screen instructing the parents on what they're doing during the session. This is just one model of telehealth that we'll be talking about today, but we wanted to give you an idea of what that might look like. Oops, there we go. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Simisak to talk through our different models of telehealth. And then we're going to turn it over to our colleague, Dr. Muna Khalif, to talk through equity specifically.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so we like to show, videos or examples of how things might look, and we know that that's not necessarily the model for everything, but that is one area we've been exploring of providing kind of early support via some parent coaching or caregiver coaching while families are waiting as kind of a supplement to kind of get them in contact with some support to do some routines-based communication and other high priority areas to focus on. So now I'll talk just a little bit more generally about telehealth, because of course that's not the only way you could use it. We've probably all become really accustomed to what telehealth feels like over the past couple of years. And this definition is probably becoming less and less needed in these kinds of conversations. But it is the use of some kind of telecommunications technology to support the delivery of health-related services or supports of some kind. And one thing we'll talk about is that can be direct or indirect. And it can also and oftentimes will include combinations with in-person support. So it might not be a standalone model where everything's done solely via telehealth. Right, next slide. So this is kind of what boils down to some of the important parts of what, telehealth is but a tool. We'll kind of keep, laying that out. But as we kind of figure out, okay, now that we hopefully don't have to use telehealth anymore where it is not helpful, because we've probably all I have experienced ways in which it's probably not the most helpful tool. How can it be helpful moving forward to help, connect people with support and services in different kinds of ways? And so one thing to keep in mind when you think about telehealth is there's some connection between a provider of some kind of that health service, or if we're talking education, of that educational service, and an end user or a person on the other end who's receiving it. But that can really vary in more of a synchronous or live kind of connection, like the video Adele was just showing you. That video shows a provider live with the family who's in their home, talking them through, observing, giving them some strategies to use, and kind of being there, with them. But there's also the use of asynchronous technology where, let's say that same family wanted to work on something, they were working on some different strategies around mealtime, and it might not be possible to have a provider there at that time. Asynchronous technology could help that family to record, a sound clip or a video clip, upload it to a secure portal that's HIPAA protected if you're talking health or, for schools, that'd be FERPA, but upload it, and then somebody will view it later and then provide feedback in some way. And so that's that kind of range between, is that connection synchronous or is it asynchronous? This is also an important distinction between what telehealth would probably be versus like e-online learning, which would maybe be just like a module that you watch online at your own time and there's no connection with anyone else. It's not saying one is better than the other, but just to kind of describe how it might be used moving forward. Next slide. Another really, if we take anything away from today, I think this is one of the things that I've continued to think about differently as the pandemic has gone on. Even though I spent a lot of time thinking about telehealth prior to the pandemic, I've definitely refined how I've thought about it and learning from others. as well. And again, it might not always be that synchronous, I'm directly connected with somebody providing a service to them over the computer. I don't know if anybody on here had this experience, but we definitely would never recommend, oh, it would be great, go turn on a computer and stick somebody in front of it for, 10 hours a week, and that should be their sole way of receiving a service or support. That, of course, is not the case. But it can be used to directly provide person-to-person kinds of services. It can also be used in kind of that coaching, model of like family coaching, parent skills, or working with other people who are kind of serving as like the liaison or the person who's then working in person with the person that they're supporting. It can also be a tool that's used to supervise or train staff. Maybe staff are taking video clips of what they're doing and uploading it to a secure portal to be looked at later. And kind of the last piece on this, if you click one more animation here, it also can be used to coordinate services. So it might be more convenient to have an IEP meeting and be able to invite the the speech language pathologist to weigh in or attend or connect with the team somehow, and so it could be a tool to help do that a little bit more feasibly. And so I think that's one thing for all of us to kind of keep in mind as we move forward, is definitely it shouldn't replace something that's going well in person, but are there ways in which it could be a tool to help make the high quality connections and additional services work better? So maybe then you can see more, you can do more supervision of the staff on your teams, because I can see more people as the supervisor if I'm remote than if I'm driving, hours between locations. So that's just one idea. But yeah, okay, next slide. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Muna Khalif, who's going to talk us through a few slides here on why it's important to consider health equity when we're doing anything with telehealth.
Actually, can we go to the next slide, please, Adele?
Oh, yeah, yes, of course.
Thank you so much.
Sorry,
and then
I
you
got
guys
out
can
of
come
order.
back to it. No, you're totally fine. I'll have to drop out after this, but thank you, Jessica and Adele. So let's quickly discuss what helps in achieving equity in telehealth. A short answer is to plan for inclusion and equity from the onset of the design. The quote in the middle there addresses the elephant in the room. Diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, belonging is an outcome. So what does this mean to us? It's key that we understand that change must be systemic and sustainable to address disparities of care caused by structural racism in healthcare. For example, anyone who might be familiar with the Intercultural Development Inventory, short IDI, and its 5 stages understands the steps of moving from a monocultural to a multicultural mindset. So for example, the minimization stage is the transitional stage where people or organizations are failing to acknowledge the importance of our differences for the sake of unity. And this is an opportunity for us to learn from some organizations' failed attempt when one person is hired to be the director of equity and inclusion, while the rest of the leadership team is carrying on with old practices that is essentially harmful to the communities we desire to serve and protect. Next slide, thank you. In this slide, 13.
The right one or the next one, Muna, sorry.
Yeah, consideration. So consideration to improve equity in telehealth access. Equity of access to telehealth includes recommendation for providers to be flexible, as was mentioned earlier, in telehealth delivery. So for example, the needs and services of different groups may vary by location, regionally. Providers should consider mixed in-person with a remote telehealth delivery offering. And lastly, provide technology care assistance. And Adele and Jessica may be able to go in depth about this one, as well as supporting people to get through their first session of telehealth. When people do one telehealth session successfully, they are more likely to continue to use it in the future. Support the e-health using technology to access information about their healthcare. In the chat, I will put 2 links. The first one is a report by DHS on racial equity in Medicaid programs. And the second link will be a podcast by the Association for Positive Behavior Support, which highlights the importance of being more intentional about anti-racism in implementation science. Thank you. Back to you, Adele.
Thank you, Muna. And we'll look out for those in the chat. Next, we're just going to talk over briefly what you need to do a telehealth session. Again, we probably, most of you have lived experience now doing some type of telehealth session. It might not be synchronous, it might be asynchronous, but essentially what you need is some type of device that connects to the internet. You need internet access and a secure connection. I'm going to hand it over back to Dr. Simasek to finish out our last 2 slides here. And then we're going to transition to our provider group to talk through, again, their lived experiences using telehealth to provide services currently.
Thanks, Adele. Dr. Demian, that was great. And thank you, Muna, as well. So we don't want to take all the time, so we'll wrap up. I think we have this slide and maybe one more, and then that's all. But when we talk about telehealth a lot, we spend most of our time probably talking about things we don't think telehealth can do, and just kind of, it's exciting to have technology and innovation, but just kind of our list here of we don't want to think of it as some kind of magic solution, because it won't be. It can't do all the things. And so it's important that there's, that ongoing lens on quality and ongoing evaluation and health equity as we explore new avenues of using telehealth. So it's definitely a tool. It's as good as whatever it is you're probably providing over it. So you want to make sure you have a high quality service or support or intervention that's being used. Moving forward, we wouldn't ever recommend it replace in-person services that are going well, or compromise, quality of a service for some kind of cost savings, which I don't think any of us would, taking the time to join today, would even be thinking about, but it's important to put it out there. And it definitely shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. So thinking about having options and then working with the person that you're supporting or their family, if they're, a child or youth, is important. And it might be that kind of really combined approach that you get these types of services in person, but maybe you can add on a little bit of additional support in certain contexts with some telehealth, or maybe the person's getting 100% of their direct services in person, but you can add on some, high quality supervision or coordination and help things kind of on like the back end of the services run a little more smoothly. And it's also important to note why evaluation is really important. There's definitely been well-intentioned attempts to increase access that might not always be telehealth. There's some kind of interesting studies out there where people have tried, if we just, train everyone on how to do this, that will help increase access. And it's really important to monitor and evaluate and have that really objective approach, because they're not always successful. And so that's important to know as we're kind of exploring some new territory here together. All right, next slide. And I think that's it, but there is some positives. So stay on the rest of the call. There are things that we do think telehealth could have promised to help with. One that I wanted to make sure to point out, so these are things we've talked a little bit about already, hopefully helping to shorten long periods of time for waiting, increased opportunities, maybe additional visits or sessions, or times to check in. You can generalize across settings. help to access more specialty kinds of support. So if I am supporting a child who uses augmentative and alternative communication and I haven't used that as much before, maybe, I could get some telehealth sessions or support or training from a provider that does know how to use it well. That training, capacity building, coordination, following up, doing boostering if you're following up and someone needs some additional support. But this last bullet I liked because somebody shared this with me. It was just anecdotal, so there wasn't any like data behind it really, but that they had transitioned some youth. So they had like a group kind of setting for youth working on kind of social skill type things. And what they had to move that online, of course, during COVID. And one thing that they found is that sometimes youth who might have a lot of anxiety about social situations were more comfortable doing that group. And then I think also if they had youth who might have like self-injury or those kinds of behavioral challenges, then they could also participate without going in person in a way they couldn't as much with the in-person. So I thought it was important to know that it could also be someone's preference that they like to receive services that way. All right, I think that's what we had prepared, and now we will turn it over to the providers. We did put everyone's slides in here just so that we don't have to unshare and reshare, but just tell us next slide when you're done so that we know. And go back one more, Adele, sorry. This is the order the slides are in. I just put them in as we received them. So go ahead and if that helps you plan when you're going to be talking. But thank you for sharing, and we'll go ahead. And there you go. Move to our first provider, Amal. Hello. Thank you. Is it letting you unmute yourself to share?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Welcome. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Amal, and I am with Comfort Therapeutic Services. I'm a manager at Comfort Therapeutic Services. So just diving into how we have used telehealth since the pandemic, we mainly used it in order to conduct assessments. So completing the CMDEs for the services that we provide, as well as treatment plan for the children that we currently see. And we've also used it for the other services we provide. So just to go back, we do provide children's therapeutics service and support. We also provide EIDBI and ARMS. So depending on which service we're tackling, we've used telehealth to complete their assessments. I would say one of the barriers that we faced definitely at the beginning was lack of proper technology, internet connections. There were a lot of confusion, but as time went on, as mentioned before, as parents get a hang of how to use the technology, it definitely have improved. What some of the benefits with using telehealth, especially for assessments, have been the ability to complete the assessments and treatment plans while evaluating a child at their home environment, while getting a chance to see them interact with their siblings, or how do they play, and evaluating all of that. Collaborating with school and participating in IEP meetings with parents have also been successful for us. So we've had the chance to have our QSP or our BCBA participate in IEP meetings and taking part of that, or just collaborating in general with other services that our children are receiving from outside of here. And as mentioned, observing children in their home environment have definitely been one of the key takeaways. So overall, I would say when it comes to assessments and treatment plans, telehealth has definitely been successful on that realm.
Thanks for sharing that, Amal. That's really helpful. And I had that was the first time I've seen it come up of someone successfully using it to do that collaboration in IEP meetings. And so I'm so glad that you shared that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Dr. Eric Larson is going to share next. Welcome.
Hi there. Hi there. I believe I'm on. So we're going to be talking about working with parents and caregivers. And of course, as you've already just been saying, by now we all know how difficult and laborious it is to be responsible for keeping our children engaged in distance learning. and telehealth's no different. But the right dose of telehealth can work really well for certain families and not at all for others. So we're customizing the schedule, the amount of time, the length of a session, and what we do in the sessions for each family to really fit the strengths and needs of both your child and you. You both have different strengths and needs and tolerances for telehealth. So as Jessica was saying, for some, especially if you're on a huge waiting list for treatment, we can get you at least started with just the basics, the basic, important, and straightforward recommendations. And most importantly, what telehealth lets us do is we get to see what happens. So we get to see whether the ideas we give you are any good or not, and then make changes based on how your child responds right in front of us. Positive reinforcement's the foundation of our treatment, but every child likes different things. Does your child like being flown around the room in a laundry basket, or can't you even drag him into the laundry basket? Does he get excited by playing Angry Birds with a tower of used Amazon boxes? Does he like your dance party? We find out really quickly which parents love to dance and which parents are karaoke queens. Or we find out really quickly your child's not at all impressed by your greatest Prince impression. And if he likes things on the screen, we can help you curate things. You know, he might really like TikToks, but there's so much on TikTok that's really not appropriate. And we can create a list of great and links for great TikToks that you can use as reinforcers. But as always, what we're doing is we're watching what happens through direct observation to see really how accurately our ideas are matching what you need with your child. Now, you may be already trained in treatment, and then you're benefiting from video modeling by us of the next steps in treatment. You may need a lot of help brainstorming what to do next. You don't really like what we had written out for you. You've got better ideas, but you can get feedback from us about that. And you can also benefit from unobtrusive observation. We use that word in science, meaning we're not right there in front of you and your child, distracting both of you from what your natural activity is, but instead we're on the screen and you're interacting with your child, again, without us distracting you. This even plays out for parents who are working. They're really busy. They're leaving their kids at home, either with a sitter, a PCA, or their older sister. And they're getting some peace of mind knowing that the therapist is going to check in on them and see if the house is on fire yet, or see if your son wants to lodge a complaint about their sister. So we can really give you a lot of helpful information, and we're going to collect numerical data on what is going on and then summarize that data so you can see whether your child's making any progress with what we're doing. We could also cue you. You may not be even right in the room while we're interacting with your child or while we're observing your child in an independent activity. And we can cue you by texting you about when to come back into the room and deliver a well-timed reinforcer. And finally, we can really use the benefit of your time with us to help you brainstorm how to deal with big challenges. You might have real challenges in the community. We can talk about them. You might collect a video of a meltdown in a grocery store, or even a video of some Karen giving you a hard time about how you're handling your own child. And we can give you a sympathetic pep talk in response to all that. So all of this would be highly individualized. Everybody's different, every parent, every child. And we can customize how we work with you through telehealth so that we're not just another burden on your responsibilities. So that's my quick run through there. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Dr. Larson. That was wonderful. And yeah, I think that that's one thing we hadn't really talked a lot about, but that that ability to do that observation without kind of throwing off the whole dynamic and kind of being in the way, so to speak, I think is really great too. All right, we'll move on here. I believe we have Idle.
Yes, Adele. Hello, everyone. My name is Adele. And I am coming in from Hope Autism Center. We are located in Bloomington. We've been using telehealth ever since the start of the pandemic, and it's been really helpful for us. We're able to get along with families and train them on how to utilize it. At the beginning, it was quite difficult. So some of the plans, some of the services we provide through telehealth is ITP, CMDE, and family caregiving counseling, which has been easy to do because once we're done with providing the ABA treatments with the clients, we're able to communicate with them and direct them on and give them some counseling right there on the spot instead of setting up an appointment like we used to do. What have been the barriers would be technical difficulties. As everyone else mentioned, that's been quite difficult because we don't have access to physically go there into the home and fix things for them. But one thing we started doing moving forward was whenever we would start a new client on telehealth, we would go there for one day and kind of run them through how to utilize the tablets. How to turn it on, how to charge it, what windows to use, what windows to stay away from, and kind of setting up a child safety tool for them as well. So they're not kind of like all over, their kids are not touching other websites and things like that. And then the environment has been a difficult one because we don't have the ability to kind of control who's in the home, who's in the room, if there are other kiddos running around, and just making sure that it is a quiet space, it is a quiet environment, and the children are not getting distracted. So it kind of took a while to kind of figure out with the families what hours are good to call in, what space are good to use, is it a safe space for the children to sit through for long periods of time. And then another issue that would come up during these times would be lack of resources. Some families don't have access to tablets. They might have 4 or 5 children who are also doing homeschooling. So they're using the tablets they have at home and the laptops. So kind of having that option to them. So what we started to do was, because most of our clients were doing telehealth, we were able to check out tablets for them and let them borrow it and check it back in if they were coming into the center, which kind of allowed more clients to be able to get the services that they do deserve and that they need. Some of the benefits from providing the service was that we were able to have a broader understanding of the client's day-to-day in their home environments, and kind of understanding what that looks like. So if we did need to update their ITP plans, we knew what to add and what not to add, and what to take away. Another benefit was increased attendance. There were times where clients would not come into treatment because they would have like maybe a doctor's appointment. So they would think it's okay to skip a whole day, but now they're able to come online for part-time, go to their doctor's appointment. So it really helped with the clients and our kiddos to be able to get a longer period of services. And then family involvement, which was like the biggest benefit from providing telehealth, being able to have access to them at all times, whether during providing services, and being able to communicate with them at a faster pace. So how does this help families access the program? I would say flexibility, being able to have that opportunity for families who need that. Some families have different work hours, different schedules. So having this option for them has been great impact for them and very helpful to them. And then some might have like transportation issues. They might not want to send their children to a center via public transportation without being present. So if they weren't present, they would prefer for them to stay home. So just having this opportunity as an option for them has been very helpful. And all the kiddos and our clients are able to get, even if it's part-time of treatment, because it makes a big impact. So that's been quite helpful for that. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That was incredibly helpful. It's like so much about what you shared. I also love the images. I think it helps people kind of see like what that, looks like on the day-to-day.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. And I would also say, I have children who receive some different kinds of services, and that increased attendance, we have like done that where we're like, it's like, oh, that, there's someone has a runny nose, but the child who doesn't have a runny nose could still do something, and then you don't have to like cancel, or whatever. So I think that's great. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. All right. And then I think, let's see, we've got Jay closing us out today. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Very excited to talk about this subject. Just a little context, our agency, Behavioral Dimensions, is strictly in-home services. So 100% of the work that we do is right in families' homes. We do intensive early intervention, primarily with preschoolers and toddler age kids, hopefully ideally right after they've been diagnosed. And we provide services throughout a good part of Minnesota. We're heavily located in the metro area. We also have services up in Duluth, St. Cloud, Alexandria, Marshall, and the far northern suburbs. So being forced into using telehealth has really actually, I think, benefited us in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to our staff support, which is what I'm going to be talking about briefly here. We are our mental health professionals and our supervisors, which are primarily board certified behavior analysts, are really located all over the state. And we're finding that just more access to telehealth, more utilization of telehealth has really improved our staff support. And we've really embraced it really from, again, COVID forced us into a lot of the practices that we have. There's a very, very well-known provider shortage in Minnesota. Don't have to talk long at all about that, but we are now able to more quickly get interviews set up with our applicants, regardless of where they're living. Time of day is more flexible. We used to have people come to our main office, which is in St. Louis Park. Now, basically 100% of our interviews are done through video and telehealth. And we've also added a component where, because our work is unique, we're requiring that in order for anybody to be hired, they have to first observe a session. So in some cases, even before they apply for the job, we get all the HIPAA systems in place, and then they will observe a session with a supervisor observing with them remotely for an hour or two, get a chance to ask some questions, learn a little bit more of what the work looks like, make sure it's a good fit for them. We can do some initial screening and then kind of move forward with that hiring process if it is a good fit. And then really also we've adopted a lot of our new hire training into more remote systems where they're observing sessions more easily scheduled. So they're learning our teaching techniques, they're learning the child's program. They don't have to be right on site with those other staff and those kids. And that really was helpful during COVID when we were trying to, promote social distancing and just not having too many people in the house. And then, once somebody's up and running independently, the telehealth has really been used quite a bit. I put some of the billing terminology in here, observation and direction, and then just that adaptive behavior treatment with protocol modification. We've been able to significantly increase our staff support through telehealth by doing remote sessions, whereas it used to be that our BCBAs or our supervisors were driving from house to house to house to supervise staff. Now they can sit at home. There still are benefits to being in person, but during a certain stretch of COVID, we really had 100% of our supervision and observation direction of staff being done remotely to limit the number of people in the house. So we're finding more frequent supportive staff, more time with each individual staff because we're not having to spend as much time driving. And so I think we're just finding that our staff support is dramatically improved, and we're actually trying to record and get some data on our staff retention during all of this. It's easy to record a session that you're observing and then later review it with staff, and you can go over some of those specific teaching techniques. More opportunity to provide feedback to the teaching techniques, which then really leads to a higher quality of service. During some of our observation and direction sessions, we're collecting inter-observer agreement data. We're recording program implementation fidelity. And so we're just really trying to get more of the more staff support we get, we feel like the more they're going to be supported and will stay with us, and we can retain those staff, which then leads to that higher quality of service, that correct and consistent implementation of what we're really working on. And also through the treatment plan modifications, we're able to more quickly move the child through their treatment plan objectives, introducing new responses and stimuli. So we're not having to wait for a supervisor maybe to show up at a house for a few days. They can quickly jump on a telehealth session, provide some guidance to the staff there, and then just kind of keep things moving along. So we're really finding so many benefits to, again, being forced to use telehealth. We have some of the drawbacks or barriers that other folks have mentioned, as far as like the technology and during COVID, when all the kids were in distance learning, there was issues with bandwidth. And so we actually had to get creative in a couple places and buy some hotspots to put in those houses to make sure that our staff could be supported through some of those telehealth systems. And also, I think just the fact that we're in some cases limiting the number of staff in the house, it's providing more health for folks, but it's also in some cases making the sessions a little bit more natural. And that way our supervisors can really see a more natural session flow. So I'll leave it at that because I know we're running a little bit out of time, and leave some time for questions. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. That was extremely helpful. And I like that everyone just shared really, unique different areas that you've been seeing some of these, even surprising. I learn something every time I hear folks talk about this. So thanks for sharing that, Jay. All right. Well, we do have a little bit of time for questions. Look at that. And I'm sure everyone on here, ourselves included, would be happy for you to reach out if you'd like more specific information from anyone. I just want to give a quick acknowledge and very, very heartfelt thank you to everyone for taking the time to put those examples together. I think that you can provide examples that are really relevant and that can help other providers or families or people who are looking for services. So thank you. All right. Do we have, I think we can monitor the Q&A. Any questions, burning questions anyone wanted to ask? If not, I'll put some contact in the chat so you can get in touch with any of us, and we're happy to help route you to folks if you wanted to talk to someone specifically. Here is an inbox that will come to our team. Got specific questions, and thanks for joining us. And thank you all. I think we've got about a minute and then we switch over. So I'm happy to keep an eye on the Q&A, but if folks need to start dropping, please feel welcome to as well.
Can I just reiterate one quick thing that Dr. Larson spoke about, which I thought was such a good point? I think that the advancement of telehealth is going to allow more families to get more service. We've talked about reaching out where we don't have to start a child with 20 or 30 or 40 hours a week. We can start them with more minimal services to get them at least some type of service. I know we've experienced that. Dr. Larson spoke to that. I think that's going to just help improve services, especially in the rural parts of the state where we've been able to take on some families that are just family skills training only services. That because of telehealth wouldn't be available probably otherwise.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point. And that, the more we can all do to kind of figure out how to get some of these families off wait lists and get them access to some high quality, things to start with, even though that might not be the full package that they're waiting for, help support them right away. I think it's great. Thank you all. Very nice to see everybody. Take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll be closing together, so please stay on. And we also will be sharing a feedback link, so we'll wait for everyone else to come back together and we'll close out the day. Thanks all for waiting. We'll just need a couple more minutes to get our last link together.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you. I was just in the other session wrapping things up there, so thank you so much. I'm just going to really quickly say we're having just a couple of technical difficulties with our feedback survey. So what we're going to do is we are going to email that out to all participants. So everyone who is registered for the day will get that feedback survey. And linked in that feedback survey, you're going to see, you're going to get a certificate of attendance, and that you can use within your organizations to get any CEUs that you are looking for getting today. So we will be emailing that out to all participants, so look for that. And just want to say one last time to everyone, all panelists, all presenters, all participants, thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate all of this and the success of having our first symposium today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And that's all we have for you.